Hello everyone. On behalf of the BHS Old Scholars Association, I would like to welcome you all to our first OSA Roundtable webinar entitled Anxiety in Times of Crisis. Our speaker today is Ms. Hala Nafar. She's right next to me. She is an old scholar and is currently a psychologist and cognitive behavioral therapist. During this session, Ms. Nafar will take us through the different types of anxiety. She will explain how to identify the symptoms and teach us the best coping mechanisms to deal with adversity. She will also teach us much needed everyday relaxation techniques for the everyday stresses that we face. Just so that you know, we have received a number of questions on this topic. When we announced this topic, we have received a number of questions, and we will be keeping the last 15 minutes of the session to answer as many questions as we can. And now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Ms. Hala Nafar. Hala, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Serene, for the introduction. It's nice coming back.
We're happy to have you back. I understand that you're going to start us off with an explanation of what anxiety is and the different types of anxiety.
Yes, that's true. So we're going to start by defining what anxiety is and going through the different types of anxiety disorders, all right? So as defined by the American Psychological Association, anxiety is an emotion consisting of feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physiological responses like increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, sweating. So basically, this happens because the body enters the fight or flight response when you feel always hyper vigilant, as if something bad is going to happen. And this is when the sympathetic nervous system is activated. We will be talking a bit more about the biological changes and the physiological changes in a bit. So the main question is anxiety normal in those difficult times that we are passing through, or is it not? Actually, it is very normal. Anxiety in those times is very normal because we are passing through a lot of changes. We are passing through different crises, including the economic crisis that Lebanon is passing through and the coronavirus outbreak. Those different crises that we are passing through are inflicting changes to our lifestyle. So the way we communicate with people, we interact with people has changed. We can no longer greet people the way we used to without feeling guilty. So if you want to hug your friend or show affection, physical affection to people close to you, this is not very welcome these days anymore because of the coronavirus and the fear of coronavirus contraction. So and this is why our communication and interaction with people changed. So we're basically grieving the way we used to interact with other people. Our lifestyle has changed. Us going out as well, we're becoming very cautious all the time, scared that we might contract the virus or that we might spread it, scared that our family members might contract coronavirus. So we have fear over our own health and over other people's health. Especially the frontliners like nurses and doctors who are working directly with patients who have coronavirus, people who have low immunity as well, who are more prone to contracting coronavirus. So this is related to the coronavirus outbreak. As for the economic crisis, there's also a lot of fear related to the future, a lot of uncertainty, and basically people who have already a high level of anxiety, a high baseline of anxiety, worry more during those times. So their anxiety exacerbates further because of the crisis we are going through. And because people who already have a high level of anxiety already cannot tolerate uncertainty, those situations as well make anxiety worse. Now, as long as anxiety is under control, it's within average, it's fine. However, how do we know when it becomes out of control? So when do we call the anxiety or the worry a pathological or a productive worry? Basically, people who worry about abstract, distant problems, people who feel that they have no to little control over a certain situation, being very focused and overwhelmed by negative emotions related to the situation that we are, that is happening around them. People who search for solutions that cannot guarantee, they actually reject solutions that cannot guarantee success. So they always seek reassurance, they want guaranteed solutions, they want to guarantee that they're safe, and they engage a lot in catastrophization and exaggeration of the problem. So basically the worry is usually out of proportion with the actual problem. And they feel that they're helpless, they cannot cope with the situation. On the other hand, those who have productive worrying are those who think more realistically of the problem. So, and they actually problem solve more than just worry. They feel more in control of the situation, and they search for different options. They don't look to guarantee a certain solution, and they have a higher ability to tolerate uncertainty. Okay. And of course, much more adaptive coping skills. So, so this is mainly how we can know whether anxiety is pathological or productive. Now, what we will be going through is, we're gonna get into the second section of this talk.
The types of anxiety.
Yes.
I will be shutting down my video just while you talk, so that if you want to share anything, we'll have a better connection, and I will come back in the middle of the presentation, okay?
Okay.
So now we're going to go through the different types of anxiety.
Yes, that's true. So we're going to go through the most relevant anxiety disorders. We're not going to go through all of them. We're just going to go through 3 of the anxiety disorders, which I think are most relevant during those difficult times that we are passing through. Okay, so mainly we have generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder is the excessive anxiety and worry that occurs more days than not for at least 6 months. So mainly people who have generalized anxiety disorder have 3 or more of the symptoms which I will be talking about now. Those people have, they worry a lot, so the overthinking spirals out of control, the worrying becomes dominant, and dominates their life. They have, they feel a lot of irritability, a lot of restlessness. They feel a lot of physical fatigue. Their performance at work even gets, or at school or university gets affected, so they can't concentrate enough. Their performance also might decrease. They also complain of insomnia, so they do suffer a lot from a lot of sleeping difficulties, a lot of muscle tension as well. So we know that a lot of people who have generalized anxiety disorder complain of stomach aches, headaches, muscle aches. So those are very common in GAD. Then we have as well the second anxiety disorder, which we will be talking about, is adjustment disorder. This disorder is the occurrence of emotional and behavioral symptoms in reaction to certain stressors that occur within 3 months of the development of the stressor. And basically people who have adjustment disorder can have, so it can be accompanied with a depressed mood or an anxious mood or both. So the difference between adjustment disorder and GAD, first of all, is that with the cessation of the stressor, the symptoms as well subside. So basically, once the stressor and its consequences have subsided, the symptoms do not continue to occur for more than 6 months. All right, but usually the distress is out of proportion to the stressor. Now, how is this relevant to our time now? You know, the severe or the major changes that have occurred in our lifestyle can cause people to have adjustment disorder. For example, someone who has been living, you know, who has been financially well off for a long period of time, who has adopted a very good lifestyle, and then suddenly this has changed, and he or she cannot afford this lifestyle anymore. This is an adjustment. You know, people can have an adjustment difficulty to this because they cannot adjust to the major changes that have occurred. Okay, so this is related to adjustment disorder. We also have panic disorder, which is the third anxiety disorder, which I will be talking about. Panic disorder happens, so someone could be doing very well, and then suddenly they would feel that they're suffocating, they can't breathe anymore, they feel they're having chest pain, increased heartbeats, they start sweating or they get cold, they start shaking, trembling, or feeling numb. They feel nausea, they get feelings of dizziness, lightheadedness, and sometimes they feel that they're, you know, things around them are not real, which we call derealization, or they feel that they're out of their body, which we call depersonalization, and they feel that they're losing control over things around them, and they get this imminent feeling of death. So most of the time, people who have panic disorder usually go to the emergency room thinking that they're having a heart attack, and then they get tested and nothing is medically wrong. It's all psychological. So basically,
sorry, Hala, it's very interesting that the symptoms are physical symptoms.
Yes.
And I'm listening to you, and these are physical symptoms, but it's in actuality it's something not related to your physical well-being, let's say.
Yes, that's true. And this is because our mind and our body affect each other a lot. Mm-hmm. So a lot of psychological problems are manifested or reflected physically, especially when the person is not very much aware of the stressors around them. So when they're not really aware of the stressors around them, their body kind of gives them the warning sign through panic attacks or through stomach aches or other somatic symptoms. So yes, it is interesting.
Oh, sorry, I cut you off. Panic disorders.
It's okay, don't worry. So this is related to panic disorder. Now, what I want to say is the main component which I would like to focus on during this talk is the avoidance. Usually people who have anxiety, whatever anxiety disorder they have, or even other disorders that are not anxiety related, they do engage a lot in avoidance. But avoidance actually exacerbates the symptoms of the psychological symptoms rather than resolves them. And this is, we're going to target this later on to talk about how we can break avoidance. Okay? So, so now we're going to be moving to another section, Celine.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, I think now we're at the point where we're going to try to explain why do people develop anxiety, right?
Yeah. So, there are different reasons for why people develop anxiety. Two people could pass through the same stressor, but one person can develop anxiety and the other wouldn't. And this is because of the interaction of different components. I will be showing you, I will be sharing a slide right now with you. Let me see. Celine, can you allow me to share the screen? Because I can't share it right now. I can't hear you, Serene.
Oh, hi. Sorry. Yes. If you want, please go ahead and continue, and we will get back to the slide. I just need one. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, as I said, there is an interaction of different factors that actually contribute to whether someone develops anxiety or not. There are three main factors. Okay, the biological factors, the social and environmental factors, and the psychological factors. So basically, when we talk about the biological factors, we're talking about the predisposition. So each one of us is born with a certain predisposition to react psychologically to a certain stressor in a certain way. Some people are born predisposed to having anxiety. So this is more genetic. Okay, we're talking here about genetic vulnerability. We're talking about you know, how the brain functions when you actually face a certain stressor. We're talking about the immune system response. Okay, so this is related to the biological factors. Okay. Then we have the social and environmental factors, and this is related to basically what culture you come from, what socioeconomic status you come from, your family circumstances. So have you been through adverse conditions as a child? Have you experienced any traumatic events as a child? How was your upbringing with your parents? You know, the school environment, did you have a good support system or not? Your work. So all of those you know, are related to the social and environmental factors. And finally, we have the psychological factor, and this is basically related to our belief system. So our how much positive or negative self-beliefs we have, how high or how good our self-esteem is, how we perceive life in general, the coping skills that we have, and it also includes interpersonal relationships, whether we've been through a traumatic experience, whether we've been through grief. So all of this is related to the psychological factors. Mm-hmm. So basically what we are talking about is the interaction between those three components. So the biological component, so someone should be predisposed to have an anxiety disorder, and if they've been through adverse circumstances, or their childhood was difficult, or they come from a certain culture, and they do have you know, certain beliefs, or the self-esteem is low, or you know, other related components, then they might develop this kind of disorder. So this interaction should take place for this to happen, for an anxiety disorder or any other disorder to develop. Okay. Serene, are you still with me?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay. So now we're moving to talk about how the body reacts to stress, and how do stressors affect our biological functioning and the functioning of our immune system as well. So basically, as I was saying before, the mind and the body are related to each other. So what happens when we are faced with a certain stressor? Let's say that the stressor is fresh. For example, I'm going to give an example, okay? So let's say that you've been laid off from work. The first stage is what we call the alarm stage. So this is when you are newly exposed to this stressor, okay? In this case, it's you being dismissed from work. At this point, your body reacts in such a way where stress hormones are released in your brain, and the release of those stress hormones affect the, like cortisol, for example, affect the functioning of the immune system. And so at this stage, in the alarm stage, the person is more prone to become sick. So they can catch the flu, for example, or fall ill in this stage, because the immune system is affected by the release of those stress hormones. And then we go through, so let's say that this person has been dismissed from work, and for a while, you know, they're trying to cope with this event that just happened. In this case, this is what we call the resistance stage. In the resistance stage, the body is trying to fight. The brain is trying to fight, you know, the illness. And this is when the immune system functioning becomes better. So here you're trying, you're fighting. So for example, during this stage, you're trying to find another job, you're sending your CVs everywhere, you're asking people around, you're trying to problem solve, you're trying to cope with this situation. But let's say that this person has spent, you know, a long time not able to find any job. Then their body crashes, okay? Their body crashes, and this is when we enter the exhaustion stage. The exhaustion stage is when the body as well, you know, this is when a person reaches burnout. So they can't, the immune system as well stops functioning properly. Okay, so as we were talking about the biopsychosocial model, which I mentioned a bit earlier, when I talked about the interaction between the three factors, the biological, the social, and the psychological factors. So here's the slide for you to see more clearly this interaction. So how does a certain psychological disorder develop? It's because of the interaction of these three factors, all right? So this is related to, this shows how complicated we are as human beings, and so it's not as simple. We can't say that, you know, this one factor has contributed or has led to the development of the anxiety. It's basically the interaction of different factors. So Serene, can we move on to the other slide? I was also, yes, this one. I was also talking about stress and the different stages that we pass through, which is called Sally's General Adaptation Syndrome. So we were talking about the alarm stage here, where, you know, the immune system is suppressed and people can catch an illness very easily because of this, and then the resistance stage, and then we ended with the exhaustion stage. And basically this happens, someone reaches usually the exhaustion stage when they are exposed to what we call chronic stress. What's the difference between acute and chronic stress? Acute stress is more related to, you know, it's short-lived. It's for a short period of time and then it subsides. But chronic stress is when we are living a certain stressor for a long period of time. So, and this is why it can become tricky. We can get affected more psychologically. We can get affected more health-wise as well. Okay, thank you, Serene, for sharing the slides. So now we can go back to continue talking about different things. So now we've also ended this section. Yes.
And are we at the point where we can start talking about you know, how we can deal with this? I mean, this seems like a very big world of anxiety. How can we deal with this?
Yes. So there are different ways we can deal with anxiety. Of course, I come from, and of course, there are different schools that actually deal with anxiety in different ways. So I come from a cognitive from the cognitive behavioral school, and this is why I'm going to talk about how we treat anxiety from a cognitive behavioral perspective. Okay, so mainly what we need to know is that avoidance, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, exacerbates the symptoms of anxiety. So running away from our anxious thoughts and avoiding thinking of our worries actually makes it worse. And this is why what we need to start doing is become aware of our thoughts. So sitting with our thoughts, sitting with our anxiety to understand it better, instead of just running away from it. What does that mean? So sitting with your anxiety as in trying to identify what are the specific negative thoughts that are passing through our mind. For example, am I thinking of myself as a failure, as not good enough, as not competent? What are the main negative thoughts that are coming up? And what are the worst case scenarios that are being drawn in our minds? So a lot of that, people who have anxiety usually engage in worst case scenarios a lot. So they do anticipate negative things happening, and they catastrophize things and think of what's the worst that's going to happen. Now, how can we deal with it? First of all, there are actually different ways. I'm going to talk about mainly two of them. One of them is basically exposing ourselves to the worst case scenario instead of avoiding it. So thinking of, okay, that's the worst that can happen, and going through it step by step, okay, until the end, and trying to problem solve. So let's say that the worst case scenario that is coming through someone's mind is losing their job because of the economic crisis. The worst case scenario is being laid off from work. So the person can go through the worst case scenario and start decatastrophizing. So this means that, okay, if this happens, if I get dismissed from work, how can I cope with it? How can I cope with my worst case scenario? What would happen? What options do I have? Is it really going to be the end of the world? What can I do about it? So starting to problem solve. And usually people who engage in this realize that at the end of it, it's not going to be the end of the world. They will be able to manage despite everything. Okay, it could be, for example, the worst case scenario could be, what if one of my parents contracts coronavirus? That's the worst case scenario, for example. Then you would go through it step by step. Okay, are they old? Do they have good immunity? What are the options for them to get treated? So you go through it step by step to decatastrophize it. Another way of doing it is actually bringing yourself back to the present, which we will be discussing in the next few slides. But most importantly, thinking of what we can control. So what is actually under our control now? Because usually people who have anxiety have this feeling that everything around them is getting out of their control. They don't have, they cannot guide their lives. They cannot control anything. So thinking of small things that they can control. Let's say that they're scared of contracting coronavirus. And they feel that this is out of their control. So the main question for them to ask is, what do I have under my control now? How can I protect myself? What kind of precautions can I take? Are the precautions protective enough? Are they good enough? Are they safe enough? How safe am I? What are the safety measures around me that can protect me? How many people really die because of coronavirus? So also thinking of the percentages, the small percentages of people who actually end up dying because of it. So things like that, you know, bringing yourself back to reality and thinking what is actually under your control. Another way as well is to restrict worrying to a specific time and location and fully engaging in the worrying during this time. So this is what we call worry time. Let's say that you're someone who worries a lot and they overthink all day long and they worry all day long. What we actually suggest or advise is for you to assign a time during the day where, for example, an hour during the day or half an hour where you can sit and worry as much as you can during this time. So you get to worry all you want during this time, but when this worry time is over, you postpone the worrying for the worry time for next day. Okay, it's important though that the worry time is not before your sleeping time, because this would keep you awake, or not in a place where you actually enjoy and love, because then your brain would associate between this place that you love and the worrying. So choose a neutral place and choose a time that does not interfere with your life. Okay?
Hala, just a question, because this is interesting. And how do you carve time in your? I mean, I feel like, you know, these days we are overloaded with anxiety throughout the day. How do we convince ourselves that, you know, I'm gonna worry from 7 to 8 p.m.
Yes, yes. It is very difficult for people actually to set this worry time or to restrict this worrying. So at the beginning, it is going to be difficult, but then the more you practice, the easier it becomes. Usually, what I try to tell my clients is to try to imagine a box in their mind where they put the worrying in. So I tell them that once you start worrying, when it's not your worry time, imagine this box and put the worrying in this box and tell yourself that I'm going to open this box tomorrow during this time. So try to postpone the worrying. Okay? So this is, you know, one of the ways that we can do it. It's also very important to start also gathering evidence that shows that it's really not catastrophic. The situation is not that bad. So trying to compare between the anxiety and reality. What is the evidence that shows that I'm going to contract coronavirus and die? And what's the evidence that shows that I'm not? So starting to think of percentages, as I said earlier on, starting to think of safety measures, precautions, all of those things, okay? So evidence gathering is also very important, okay? We also have to think of ways to, as I said, we talked about problem solving, we talked about sitting with uncertainty, sitting with our anxiety and our emotions, not avoiding them. We also have to understand that uncertainty cannot be escaped. So we also have to sit with and accept uncertainty, that uncertainty is part of life. So, and trying, instead of to think a lot about the future, trying to bring ourselves back to the present, trying to think of what's happening now, of how can I deal with things in the present moment, rather than thinking of the future a lot. One of the things I tell my clients is that usually when we do think about a stressor coming up, or when we think that a catastrophe might happen, we believe that it's going to be out of our control, and it's going to be, we won't be able to handle it, and we won't be able to survive it. Because when it's still in our mind, it's not right there in front of us for us to search for a solution. So it's in our mind, and because we can't search for a solution, it grows and grows and gets blown out of proportion. However, if this catastrophe by itself actually happens in real life, people at this moment usually find a way to manage, because we, in our biological makeup, we learn how to cope. We learn how to deal with adversity when it happens. And this is, you know, I hear this a lot from people. People can actually pass through catastrophic events, traumatic events, and when they think that those catastrophic events might happen, they become very scared. But then when actually the event happens, they actually learn how to deal with it. They find a way to overcome it. And this is why there's no need to think a lot of the future, because when things happen, we will learn how to deal with them on the spot. We will learn how to search for solutions for them, how to search for resources for them. Okay, so this is another way of telling yourself, okay, if this happens, I will deal with it then. I don't have to worry about it now. Now I can focus on what I can do right now. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings us actually to the part on how to help ourselves focus on the present. What kind of exercises can we do?
Yeah, I think everyone, we got a lot of comments and messages about, you know, what are some practical things that we can do in our office, at home. We're feeling stressed. Is there anything we can do on the spot?
Mm-hmm. So we do have relaxation, a lot of relaxation exercises. The relaxation exercises are very important because they help us to focus on the moment. They help us to focus on our body. They actually relax our muscles, and they activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for our feelings of relaxation. It is very important to know, as I said before, that since the mind and the body are connected to each other, when we breathe in a deep and slow manner, our body, you know, it's like we're sending a message to our brain, informing our brain that things are okay and that our brain can actually calm down. Because usually when we're breathing slowly and deeply, we're in a safe place, right? When we're in a dangerous place, we breathe very quickly, we start hyperventilating. Okay, so it's also our body's way of telling our brain to calm down and relax. There are a lot of relaxation exercises that we can do. One of them is basically focusing on one thing in our body. So it could be our abdomen or our chest. So people can take a deep breath from their nose, and in such a way, they should breathe deeply in such a way where when they inhale, their tummy should bloat. So you breathe from your nose, your tummy should bloat, then you hold in your breath for a while, and then slowly you release your breath or you exhale from your mouth. And when you do, your abdomen should go back in. So should retreat again. Okay, so and this exercise should be repeated over and over and over until the body is relaxed and the mind is relaxed. Meanwhile, if you are doing the exercise and negative thoughts come to your mind or worries come to your mind, it's okay. We don't have to fight them. We don't have to avoid them, because fighting with them and avoiding them will make them worse, and you won't be able to focus on the exercise anymore. Just observe them. Allow them to pass quickly. Imagine they're on a cloud floating above you, and let them pass quickly, and then refocus on your body. So this is one way. Another way is to do a deep breathing exercise while thinking of a safe image. So some people, for example, when they imagine themselves in a forest or on the beach, they feel safe, or in a certain house or with a certain person, they feel safe. So it's important to think of a safe place where we think of different components and include different sensations. For example, where I imagine myself, what smells do I imagine myself smelling, what tastes, what do I see, what colors do I see. You know, the different sensations, we include them. And then after talking about the details of this safe image, we do the deep breathing exercise while thinking of this safe image, while using our imagination. And this also proves to be very relaxing to a lot of people who try it. Another way as well, we can also do a progressive muscle relaxation exercise where we contract and release each muscle in our body, starting from our toes, progressively until we reach our forehead. So you contract each muscle in your body, you hold in the contraction, and then you release. And then you do this for every muscle in your body to help you relax. So those are basically the relaxation exercises. You can also do deep breathing exercises while listening to meditation music. It also helps you a lot, okay?
Very interesting. Really, I mean, these are really great tips. Breathing and, you know, contracting muscles, we could do them while we're sitting in the office or at home. So these are good.
They're very practical. They're very practical.
Yeah, they are practical.
Yes.
Sorry, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
So also, most importantly, are physical activities that we can do. So going for a walk, going for a jog, doing some physical exercises, dancing. Those are very important because, you know, when we exercise, when our body moves, certain neurotransmitters that are responsible for good mood are released in our brain, like endorphins, like dopamine. And so we feel good. This is why when we go to the gym or we go for a walk, we feel good. So walking in nature specifically also is very beneficial. Social activities as well. So seeing friends, going out, you know, those are important things that we need to engage in. Of course, to a specific extent in those days of our coronavirus outbreak. So finally, before I end this talk today, I would like to say that, you know, people, it's okay if you're anxious. It's totally normal if you're anxious. Those days are very difficult. We don't have to be harsh on ourselves. Don't be harsh on yourself. Don't pressure yourself to be productive. Don't pressure yourself to work very hard. Take breaks. You know, just it's okay to be scared. Don't judge yourself. Don't feel guilty. If you're feeling very overwhelmed with the news, decrease the amount of time you're spending watching the news. Know your own limits and respect them. Don't work harder than you can. Take distance from time to time. Go for getaways. Go for, you know, things that you like to do. Get enough sleep. Follow a healthy diet. Most importantly, don't avoid. Try to confront those negative emotions that you are feeling. They're trying to tell you something, and it's okay if you feel them. Don't feel guilty that you're feeling them. And if you need therapy and you feel that you need psychiatric help, you know, we might get to a point where we might need psychiatric medication, and that's totally okay. Then please seek help when needed. Okay, it's not shameful at all.
Hala, this is very interesting. I think a lot of people think they have anxiety, have developed anxiety, so it's a very relevant topic. I must say that we have received a number of questions when we promoted this event, this webinar. We did receive a lot of questions, but I think we can put them all in 4 buckets, basically.
Okay.
And if you don't mind, I would like you to, if you can answer the questions that our old scholars have sent through.
Sure.
Okay, so the first question that was sent was, what is the difference between anxiety and stress, or is there a difference?
Okay, so basically, stress is a proportional reaction to a certain stressor. Basically, when the stressor is not there anymore, the stress also ceases to be. Okay, while anxiety lingers, so it can stay longer. Sometimes we feel anxious and we can't identify why. Plus, anxiety, you know, there are different anxiety disorders. It's more formal. You know, it's found in the DSM. So you know, this is the main difference. Okay.
The second question is it possible to suffer from more than one anxiety disorder at once?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is possible actually, and this is what we call comorbidity. So some people might have generalized anxiety disorder and social anxiety, or generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder. So that yes, disorders can come together, and some of them are secondary to the other disorder. For example, panic disorder can be secondary to generalized anxiety disorder because it happens when someone starts worrying a lot, for example, or panic disorder can be secondary to social anxiety disorder. So yes, they do come together and they can be treated in therapy. It's normal for them to come together.
Okay. The third question is about, I think, children, and it's you know, how much anxiety is normal, quote unquote, for a child. So you know, how do we gauge a child's anxiety, I guess?
Okay, so basically we can sense that from when anxiety becomes excessive. So when they feel that the child's anxiety is standing in the way of their social interactions, so they're isolating themselves more, they daydream a lot, their performance at school is affected, they're irritable most of the times. So this is when you can sense it. So when it actually interferes with the child's daily functioning, and when the child shows a lot of distress because of that, a lot of irritability, a lot of restlessness. Okay.
Okay, interesting. Okay. The final question, because we got this a few times, it's once treated. So let's say you have anxiety and you go through treatment. How likely is it that my anxiety symptoms will return? I mean, is this something like a one-time shot? Is it?
Yes. I also got a similar question from one of the old scholars as well, related to relapse. So they were asking about how can relapse be treated.
Relapse meaning when they go back?
Yes. So
okay.
when you treat your anxiety and then you go back to it. Relapse is normal, okay? Sometimes it happens. Sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it happens. And it happens because of different reasons. Maybe the stressors are different this time. For anxiety to be back, or the stressor became worse, or became exacerbated, or the treatment was not enough. So, for example, they need a longer time in therapy. So, relapse is normal. It doesn't mean that someone is back to square one, or they're abnormal, or something is wrong with them. It can happen, and it can be treated. It's treated in the same way that it's treated at the beginning of it. So we go through the reasons why the relapse has happened. go through the different worries and thoughts related to that, and we try to work on helping the person gain some coping skill, adaptive coping skills to deal with the new stressors, or with the the pre-existing stressors that are contributing to the anxiety. Yeah. Did I answer the question, Celine?
Yes, I believe you did. And I wanted to ask you, I think this is the final question, and it is basically there was no mention of any pills, medication, like is this part of the treatment, or are we addressing anxiety in terms of, do you take medication for it? Can you take medication for it?
Actually, it all depends. Some people, they don't need medication. They work through their anxiety without having to resort to any kind of medication. While others, so when the anxiety is really high, especially at the beginning, usually at the beginning of therapy, I'd like to give therapy a chance before referring to a psychiatrist. Of course, if there are no there's no risk like suicidal ideation or other things. So I do usually give this chance, okay? But if we feel that anxiety is very, very high and the person, they just, therapy is not enough for it, then we do refer to a psychiatrist. And in this case, the medication would actually support the therapy. So it's basically the therapy and the medication that work together to help this person overcome anxiety. And it's okay, sometimes
yes, of course,
and it's totally okay if someone needs this, okay?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, these are all my questions. These are the questions that were sent by our old scholars. I want to thank you so much for a very interesting session. And I would like to tell the viewers that we will be doing many more webinars, different topics, so stay tuned. Ms. Hala Nafa, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
For moderating this session.
Thank you.